Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth, and if you're new, welcome. I finished a quilt this week for my niece, and I'm going to share how I put it all together. I quilted it, I added the binding, and I'm sending it off very soon. Let's get started. Here are some of the blocks I made in my last video. I'm calling this block Baby Bows. I could not find the block in any of my encyclopedias, and if someone does happen to know a name for this block, I'd sure love to hear about that in the comments. I chose the colors for this quilt using the backing fabric that I chose ahead of time, and then I laid all of my blocks on my floor and I pieced them together first in rows, and then I put those rows together. I think this quilt turned out really pretty. This is just the quilt top, and it measures 41 inches square. And now I'm going to get my batting and I will make my quilt sandwich. I typically use a very light spray using this 505 temporary adhesive. I spray it on my batting and then I smooth the quilt right on top of it, and I begin somewhere in the middle. Typically I begin in the middle and work out from there. After attaching the front of my quilt to the batting, I turned it over, and now I'll attach the backing, and the backing here is a couple inches bigger, or 1 to 2 inches bigger all the way around. Just that makes it easy for me to get this sandwich together. I don't have to really be fussy about the edges, don't have to worry about losing an edge with this backing. I began in the center of my quilt, rolling up one of those corners, so I'll be sewing on the diagonal through the center, and I'm just going through the block, so I won't need to do any marking. These little squares and half square triangles are only 2.5 inches, so I can easily see where I'm going as I sew the stitch through the center, and I always give myself just a little bit bigger stitch. And I think most machines you would want to use a walking foot, but my Juki seems to do just fine using the all-purpose foot, and that's what I'm doing right here. After getting the center quilting line in, I just moved out from there and went every other square and sewing all the way through, and every now and again I stop and check the back and make sure that everything is nice and smooth. After getting the quilting lines in all the way across my quilt, I turned my quilt and now I am putting stitches in to create little squares on point through my quilt. Now that it's quilted, I will trim away the excess batting and backing using my quilt top as my guide. I think I could have chosen any color for the binding, any of the colors in all of those quilt blocks, and I do like green, so I chose a green fabric, and I'm cutting my strips 2.5 inches wide, and I needed 4 strips and just a tiny bit more to get all the way around my quilt. I joined my binding strips. I put right sides together at each end, and I let the salvages hang off just a little bit, and then I put a seam in from sort of corner to corner, and I will do that with all of my strips, and then I'll cut away those excess triangles, and then I'll press this long piece of binding in half. Typically for children's quilts or a quilt that I think might be used a lot, I put the binding first on the back. I attach it to the back of my quilt, and then I will roll it to the front and top stitch. So I'm attaching or laying this down on the back of my quilt on one of the sides, and I left about a 10-inch tail so that I can attach the ends when I get all the way around. When I get to the corners, I sew to the end, just stopping about a 1/4 inch from the end, and with my needle down I pivot, and then I sew off the corner of the quilt. Then I take the binding and I fold it, pull it up, and then fold it down right there on the corner, and I will begin stitching right there on the fold. After getting all the way around, I have 2 long tails, and I'm going to fold one side and cut the other side, and my fold needs to have at least 2.5 inches on that little tail there on the left. I cut the other tail off right there on the fold, and now I'm going to measure that left piece. I want to measure 2.5 inches, and I just use that piece that I cut off as my measuring guide. And now I can attach these 2 ends just the way that I attached all of those binding strips, putting them right sides together and then putting a seam in there from corner to corner. And you need to kind of bunch your quilt up so you have room to work. And then I always double check that the binding is fitting correctly before I trim away those triangles. I pinned the binding to the front, just a couple pins to get myself started, and after that I did not pin. I usually just kind of roll it over as I go around and top stitch all the way around my quilt. I love the way this baby quilt turned out. That backing fabric was a big help in choosing all of the colors for my quilt block, and this quilt block is just a classic quilt block. I happened to see it on an antique quilt, and I took a picture, and I've had that picture for a while, and here is that beautiful quilt block in this baby quilt. It's so pretty. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.